Hi, I'm Pete and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. Today is part 2 of our Making Hay series. We're going to cover tedding and raking hay. I'm going to talk about the best time to do each, as well as how the equipment works, along with lots of video of me doing the work in the field. It's been challenging haymaking weather, to be honest. It's been cool but sunny, and so getting it dry has been a bit of a challenge, even though we're in the middle of a long dry spell. So stay tuned and I'll show you how all these things work. This is my tedding setup. It's a Farmall 504 tractor that was built in the mid-60s. It's about 45 horsepower on a good day, and a little 2-star tedder behind it. The tedder was probably the best buy I ever made on the farm because I got this one for free. A neighbor had had it sitting in his field for about 10 years when another farmer left it there, and he said, if you want it, you can come and get it. Well, it turned out, worked great, didn't have to put any money into it. The big thing is that it's too small for what we're doing now. I get frustrated. It takes forever for me to ted hay. Now, the principal reasons for tedding hay are to shorten the drying period for the hay. Tedding does 3 things. It mixes up the hay so that the green stuff on the bottom can get mixed up with the drier stuff and the sun can help it dry. It spreads the hay out, so if you remember when I was cutting, the hay was piled into windrows. It'll spread the hay out to get more sun exposure. And number 3, it fluffs the hay up so that air can get through it, because as the hay dries, it sinks down and less air gets through it. There's 2 main designs for a tedder. As I said, this is a 2-star tedder, which means it's got 2 of these rotary wheels on it. And these wheels turn this way. Well, I can't turn them right now, but they'll turn this way and force the hay through the middle and really throw the hay and spread it out. This is the smallest version. It's a 2-star. They make 4-star and 6-star versions. And this is good for spreading hay out, but it's really violent with the hay. So I'll get to this in a minute. When you ted hay is really important. The other type of header is what's called a fluffer tedder, and this is a fluffer tedder. It's a 9-foot width. It's a Peckway tedder, which is the most popular brand. These aren't nearly as popular as the star tedders, but they have their own use. They're good for fluffing hay that's in a windrow that you want to keep in a windrow. This reel runs this way, and so it throws the hay up and straight backwards. It doesn't spread it out. But if you've already got raked hay and you want to keep it so that you don't have to rake it again, this is a more gentler way of tedding, and it helps get the air through the hay. I greatly prefer this star tedder over the fluffer tedder, and you can probably tell because the fluffer's sitting over in the weeds, although it does have its uses. If my hay gets rained on and I have to ted it late after it's partially dry, the fluffer's a lot more gentle on it, and it'll fluff the hay up and get the air through it and help it to dry. But this is the go-to implement for me. Tedders aren't necessary in the haymaking process, but they make life a whole lot easier. When we started haying, we didn't have a tedder. We had a sickle bar mower, a rake, and a small square baler. And the dry time on the hay was a lot greater. It was at least 4 sunny days in a row. The tedder will shorten dry time by about a day because it mixes up the hay and gets more sun into the hay crop. The first rule of tedding is that the timing is everything, because the drier that the hay gets, the more you're going to lose due to leaf shatter. Dry leaves fall off, they come apart, and this is mostly seen with alfalfa and clover, where the nutrition is all in the leaves and not in the stems, but it can also happen to grass hay. Tedding is a violent process, so you want to ted the hay when it's not too dry. The drier it is, the more you're going to lose. And you can lose up to 10% of the hay with just one tedding if you don't do it at the right time. So my normal schedule is to cut hay in the afternoon, and then the following morning, early in the morning while the dew's still on the ground, I go out and ted the hay that I cut. When you cut hay, the cut grass on the ground will continue to respirate for about 12 hours. So if you ted the next morning, the hay has finished its respiration, it's exhausted the moisture that will happen through that, and it'll start the drying process. So you're catching your tedding just at the beginning of when the hay is starting to dry. If you get out there and you start tedding and the hay sounds crunchy going through the tedder, then you've missed the real best tedding window. You may still have to ted, but you're going to lose a percentage of that hay. I usually ted and rake with our smaller, more fuel efficient tractors like this Farmall 504. My go-to tractor is usually our Farmall H. Unfortunately, it's down for repairs, so I'm using the 504 today. Unlike raking, there's no magic way to ted a field. I usually run between the haybine windrows, and that way the tedder pulls the windrows apart and spreads the hay out more evenly into the field. You're just trying to get it spread out for maximum solar exposure. And it doesn't really matter if you run over the same ground more than once. As long as the hay's still limp, you'll be fine. In fact, if I have clumps that the haybine's made, I'll usually run over those multiple times to try and spread out the clumps so I get more even drying. After the initial tedding, remember the morning after I cut it, the hay takes another 24 to 36 hours before it's ready to rake. And again, as with everything with hay, this depends on the drying conditions. The way I know that the hay is ready to rake, if I go out in the field and I pick it up and it's dry and crunchy through most of its thickness, but it has green limp stems or leaves on the bottom, I know it's time to rake it to get it turned over so that the bottom side can dry. Raking at the right time will speed the rest of the drying process because raking mixes the limp and the crispy hay together, and I think that some of the limp hay's moisture gets sucked into the crispy hay, so you get a more homogeneous windrow that way. It pulls the hay off of the ground so that air can get through the windrow. And it also exposes that green hay to the sun so you get more even drying. We use a New Holland 258 rake. It's an 8-foot swath rake. It'll clear an 8-foot swath into a windrow. It's what's known as a side delivery rake. So these rollabars spin and the hay works its way down the slope and then gets dumped on the side delivery rake. The New Holland rakes are still considered the Cadillacs of side delivery rakes. In fact, they're still making these rakes today, but a lot of more modernized farmers than us have gone to different types of rake. And these include what's called a rotary rake, which is PTO driven, and it spins in a horizontal circle instead of this vertical circle and delivers the hay all to one side. They're really great at picking up fine stuff. You can speed through the field with them. And then the other type of rake is a wheel rake, and you'll see these all over the place. They're probably the most dominant around here, where the rake's shaped like a giant V and it's got big wheels along the V, and it's not PTO driven. The wheels just move as they move across the ground. They push the hay into a center windrow at the point of the V. Now, onto the raking process, which is considerably more complicated than tedding. And in fact, if you got 10 farmers in a room and asked them each the best pattern to rake in, they would all disagree, and they would passionately argue for their type as being the best. I developed my own way of raking, and the way I developed it was due to the fact that for years we baled with a small square baler with a kicker on it that trailed the bale wagon behind it, and I wanted straight windrows without a lot of curves or tails on the end of them so that I could throw the bales accurately into the wagon without messing around with repointing the thrower all the time. So here's the pattern, and I'll try to be deliberate about it because it's kind of complicated. You start just like when you're mowing hay with your rake pointing so that it's dumping the hay towards the middle of the field, and you work around all the sides of the field this way with your rake pointing so that it dumps the hay towards the center of the field from the edge of the field. And then you turn around and go the other way, so you're doubling a windrow all the way around all 4 sides of the field, and then you've created an aisle at either of the headlands to work from there. Now here's where my method gets a little funky. After I've made that double windrow all the way around the field, then I take the tractor down the field and cut the field in half and rake straight down the center of the field, making the first middle windrow. After that first pass down the middle of the field, I count 2 rake widths in from the edge of the field and make my first pass down the edge of the field. The reason I'm counting in 2 rake widths, or 16 feet, is because I'm going to double up the windrows. I do that because the big round baler likes big windrows, and so I double them up. You can also choose to rake single windrows. In fact, the hay will dry more quickly in the windrow that way, just because you don't have as big a mass of hay and more sun gets to it. Next, I go back to the center of the field and I double up that windrow, so I'm raking it over another width. Then I double up the first pass at the edge of the field. Next, I go over to the next row in the middle of the field, and here's the tricky part and the main drawback to raking this way. I have to run right along that first finished windrow with that pass, so I'm very careful to just nip the edge of that windrow with the rake and start pulling it over. The drawback is that I have a little section under that first windrow of hay that didn't get moved off the ground and rolled over. Now, usually this isn't an issue because it dries just fine given good weather, but if the weather is marginal, I have to go back and I have to nudge those windrows over just enough to flip them. And I actually did that the next day with this rake because the weather was cool and the hay wasn't drying as fast as I would like. After that, I just continue this way, repeating the same process over and over again, doubling up the windrows. And if I've cut the field in half properly with my first pass, I wind up not having to travel a lot on the headlands in between passes because I'm making kind of a big spiral that runs through the field. And when I finish up, I should finish one pass on one side of the field with my last pass in the middle of the field, all in the same round. The really great part about raking this way is you don't wind up with any tails, and a tail's where you have to turn the rake at the end of the field as you're coming around and going up to your next pass. I hated those curving tails when I ran the small square baler with the kicker. What happens is when you finish raking a windrow and you turn onto the headlands, the rake will catch the tail from the previous windrow and kick that into your headlands windrow. So you've cut off the tail of the windrow. If you rake the whole field this way, you'll wind up with no tails, just nice straight windrows, just like a planted crop would be, and just one windrow along the headland. Now when I go in and bale, I can just take up those headland windrows first with the baler, and then I'm free to pick whichever of those straight windrows running along the fields I want to head into next all the time as I bale. Even though we're in an extended dry spell, and for the most part it's been sunny, although it's starting to cloud up a little bit, I'm nervous about getting this hay dry in the barn. It's been cooler than I would like, about 10 degrees cooler in the mid-70s, and the hay's taken longer to dry than I'd like, and I'm having to work it a little bit more, mainly with the rake. The hay that I have down in the field, because it's big, tall first cutting, represents about half the hay that we'll need for the winter, so a lot's on the line, and as I said in the last video, I'm losing some sleep over it. I hope you enjoyed this video. In the next video, we're going to go over baling and loading the hay in the barn, and hopefully everything will work out all right and I'll be a happy camper. I'll see you then.